The first stop, obviously, is our new plaque here. We'll talk about this in just a second. But what I figured I would do is just give you a real quick rundown on Amboy and all the other towns that we're going to be seeing between here and Goffs. So you got to go back to the 1850s when the country's expanding westward. The gold rush is happening. You know, 48 the gold is discovered up at Sutter's Mill. By 49 you've got tens of thousands of people crossing the continent by wagon, others coming around by sailboat and so on.
Gary, please.
And you know, you have to time that trip just so. You have to leave the east, essentially the Missouri River area, not too early in the spring because you have to have enough grass out on the plains for your animals to eat. But you can't leave too late because if you do, you get into the Sierras and you chance getting caught in the snow like the Donner Party did. And of course, remember, the Donner Party, we think of it as being 160, 170 years ago, but for guys in 1850, that was only 4 years before. That was still fresh on everybody's mind. And so you pretty much limited travel on that route to the early part of May, maybe late April, depending on the grass. And you had to be across those Sierras pretty much by the end of September, because sometimes even by mid-September you start getting snowfall in the higher elevations. So that limits that amount of time. Well, you got guys back there that really want to come and get some gold. So there's various southern routes. The old Spanish Trail was used. If you ever learned about the Death Valley 49ers, you have a way southern route here that essentially follows the old Butterfield stage line. And so they're looking for a better way to come across. Well, to the north of here is the old Mojave Road. Now, we've done Mojave Road a bunch of times. We've talked about the Mojave Road, and you probably have a fairly good idea that the Native Americans, the Mojave Indians, would cross on what would become the Mojave Road to the coast to trade with the peoples out there. There was water at regular intervals if you knew where to find it. There's Paiute Springs, there's Rock Springs, there's Marl Springs, there's Soda Springs, and then finally you hit the Mojave River. And that route had been used for centuries. At some point in time, we decided that we need to build a railroad through here. And so we got to have a east-west railroad. Well, of course, the first transcontinental railroad was well north of here. But surveys were sent out in the 1850s to find a rail route in this part of the world as well. And one of those routes came all the way down through and ended, called Beale's Wagon Road, essentially came down through Arizona and then was kind of following this route. The reason being, you can't really take wagons. Oh, excuse me. Let me cut back a little bit. You've got a good wagon route to the north here on what became the Mojave Road because of those regular intervals of water. And by the 1860s, 1861, 1862, the first government wagons are going across that road. Later, however, it's too steep for railroads. You can't run a railroad through there. You got too many ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. So the better route is down here. Okay, you've got, once you get up out of Needles and up that grade to where Goffs is, it's a fairly level route around the Bristol Mountains and all these mountains up here and back around to where the railroad is running now. Okay, so that seems like a pretty good route. It wasn't until about 1882 that railroad starts to be built. There was actually built from two directions. It was built from the west going east. It was built from the east going west. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that's more detailed than we need to deal with at this time because we need to get on the road and dedicate this plaque. Essentially what was the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad was acquired by the Santa Fe, and that's what you see running through here now. That's the Burlington Northern Santa Fe now. Okay, so come to the beginning part of the 20th century. People now have automobiles. They've got old cars. They want to drive to California. Well, there's no road. However, there's a railroad. And at that railroad, there's certain stops for water for the steam locomotives. A number of those stops we will be passing through today. From Amboy, where our camp, to going east, the stops are actually named alphabetically. There's Amboy, Bengal, Chambliss, and then also Cadiz, which is a separate operation there. then there's Danby, then there's Essex, then there's Fenner, then there's Goffs, then there's Homer, then there's Ibex, and Java and Kleinfelter. Right? Then you get to Needles. I don't know what happened O to O and P, but there may be out there somewhere. And so those are watering stops along the railroad for the steam locomotives. You're in the desert, there's not much water, so water had to be hauled. Where was it hauled from? It was hauled from Newberry Springs. Unfortunately, the mayor of Newberry Springs, Cass Ellsworth, couldn't join us today, or he could tell you all about it, including how to replace a ceiling fan. So that water had to be hauled out here and placed into tanks in these locations. Now, right here was Baghdad, another place, another watering stop. So now, if you're in a car and you're adventurous, you figure you could just follow the railroad as best as you can, because you know that there's going to be some water every 10 or 12 miles along the way. And if your car breaks down and you're really in desperate straits, you could actually flag somebody down on a train. Trains didn't go all that fast back then. It was a different time. Right now, if you tried to flag down the train, he'd just wave and honk his horn. He couldn't stop anyway. An old steam locomotive like that in 1905, he might slow down and stop, and maybe he'd even, at least when he gets to the next stop, tell somebody in authority that there's a guy in a Model A back there, a Model T, whatever. It was a Model T in 1905, right? Okay.
Not even Model T.
There you go. Plus, you had people at each of these stops that worked for the railroad. Okay, so now you have essentially a dirt and sand track going between here and Cajon Pass, paralleling this railroad. Later, it would become the National Trails Highway, and you'll see signs here. This is now called the National Trails Highway again, since Route 66 has been taken out of service. And by the early 1920s, there's a real move to connect the country by road. There was really no one single road connecting the east to the west in terms of automobile roads. They established the Lincoln Highway by connecting different sections of highway and road. Some were paved, some were unpaved. And then by 1926, the U.S. highway system is established. This route here, the National Trails route, was officially opened in 1966. Parts of it were paved, 1926, sorry about that. Parts of it were paved, this part was unpaved. It was essentially a two-track, but you still had these little towns that you could stop, get help, find somebody to repair a tire, or work on your car to get it going again, and make that crossing. It was a pretty tough crossing, obviously. As you read your history, you'll get a much more detailed account. But this is how Route 66 came into being. Then you go through different phases of Route 66. So you have that early period where they're still getting it paved, where there's large stretches of it are macadam, where you have just an oil on top of sand, on top of more oil, on top of more sand. They just keep re-oiling it. And then finally, by about 1932-33, as I recall, the whole thing gets paved. One of the things that's interesting, and I'll say it real fast, is that those old cars, I remember reading a story about a guy who had to get to Needles. I don't remember if his wife was giving birth or something bad, he had to get to the hospital in Needles. And his car starts rod knocking. Well, if he goes on anymore, he's going to throw a rod and the engine's dead. So what does he do? He gets under the car, drops the pan, they're babbited bearings, right? In that period of time, I'm pointing at
guys that use their belt. They put the leather in
what the
there.
guy did is he took his belt, cut sections out of it, and put it around the rod journals, and bolted the thing back together. And it's soaked in oil. It's an oil bath, right?
Yep.
And he was able to lubricate the bearings and get into Needles.
That was a common practice, believe it or not.
The good old days.
And they had shims in there where you could adjust the tension.
How many times did you have
and
to do
so, yeah, I had to do that on my the big Dodge here, but it didn't work out so well. So now you have the Depression era. In the Depression era, this becomes a very well-traveled road because of the Okies and the Arkies, all those folks that are suffering from. Did you say Monterey Parkies? So they're escaping the Dust Bowl of the early 1930s, and they're coming west to California. If you ever seen The Grapes of Wrath, there's a whole section on there. I love to watch that section on Route 66 because it shows a lot of the stuff that we've seen. They would try to travel at night if it was during the late spring, summer, early fall, because it's so damn hot out here. So they'd try to leave Needles at night and try to make as much of the crossing as they could towards Cajon Pass before the sun came up. And you see that, of course, that scene where they're coming into California, and the local sheriff is they're trying to keep people out because everybody's coming in for work that doesn't exist. So it was a very hard time. So it's probably some of your, if not your parents, but maybe grandparents suffered through that period of time, maybe came out right there. You came out in the Gulf.
My grandparents did.
No, I figure it wasn't you.
No.
Yeah. Something interesting too, the early cars, a lot of them had wood spoke wheels. When they get into the desert and they dry out the spokes and the wheels and stuff and start coming loose. So it wasn't uncommon for them to stick the nose of the car in the Colorado River to soak those wheels and get that wood to swell up again before they came across the desert.
Good shit. Okay, after the Depression, then you get the World War II era, where travel is really reduced on the road because of gasoline rationing. Automobile makers aren't making automobiles anymore. They're making tanks and airplanes and machine guns and all that kind of stuff. So there are no new cars coming off the assembly line. Young men are being sent off to fight in Europe and in Asia. And so really most of the traffic that you would see here would be military traffic going back and forth. You would see civilians pretty much just that are moving with the military. Maybe somebody's assigned to a landing strip out here, just like you have here, and they're moving with their soldiers, could be their husbands or something like that. So not much civilian traffic. We'll come back to World War II here in a second. Then the war ends, and now you got the 50s, and you get this big expansion of Route 66 travel, because you've got money, you've got time, you've got beautiful new bitchin' cars, okay, and they're faster than ever before. You can pile in more kids than ever before. So you got station wagons running back through here. And in fact, the Renner family in 1957 made their first trip from Chicago to Pacific Palisades, California, carrying two of the Renner boys. The other two of us hadn't come along quite yet. But this is the route that my parents took when my dad was transferred out to Los Angeles. With that expansion, you have more and more people also at places like Baghdad, where there was a couple of cafes and gas stations. Amboy, of course, was one of the best preserved, with Roy's Cafe, the motel, the school. Okay, that's where everybody went to school, was right there. Amboy had the advantage of not only being on 66, but also having the advantage of being on the road that goes down to 29 Palms. So you have an intersection there, so people could come there and congregate, send their kids to the school there. If you wanted to go to church, you could go to the church there. There was not only Roy's Cafe and service station there, but there were service stations right across the street where we were camped. What was his name? The Highway Patrol Buster.
The guy that wrote the book.
The guy that wrote the Highway Patrol book here. He was there, I guess. Pretty interesting stories about that. When we get further up the road, maybe Scott will tell us some stories about how Highway Patrol was involved there. The problem is that as these cars got more and more powerful and faster, this road became really dangerous. As you can see, it's only one lane in each direction. So if you're stuck behind a rig, a moving van or something that's only going about 40 miles an hour, and you've got a nice Corvette with a 283 V8 in it, and you want to get around that guy, and you're going to try to pop around him, but there's a station wagon coming towards you, and then and there's nobody here to help. I mean, you have like Buster Burris down there at Amboy, and he had a wrecking truck. He could come and help you, but he's no medic. Yeah. They're not going to meta-flight you out of here. You're going to be dead, okay? If you're not dead yet, you're going to be. And so it became more and more apparent that something better than 66 was needed. And at this time, in the 50s, they start the interstate highway projects, and this route, of course, was replaced by Interstate 40. If you go to Ludlow, you can read the plaque about how they're going to use atomic bombs to blow out the route for Interstate 40. True story. You can't make this shit up. Okay. Then in 1972, Interstate 40 was opened through this area, and somebody said it was like turning off a faucet. One day, you had hundreds and hundreds of cars going by, stopping at the restaurants, stopping at the service stations, and so on. The next day, as soon as they opened that highway, bam, it was nothing. You could go out and just look both ways, just like now. You look up and down that highway, there's nothing. And of course, all the little towns, the little businesses dried up. It was just like when you watch Cars. You guys ever see the movie Cars? Brought a tear to my eye. Peach Springs and what's the name of
Radiator Springs.
Radiator Springs. Yeah, Radiator Springs. Peach Springs is a real town in Arizona.
With the land.
Yeah, and yes.
Well, another thing about 66 was people, were vying to get the highway to run through their town when they were doing 66.
Oh, yeah, the world's
because they
biggest
wanted
ball
the
of
business.
string.
So it kind of went this way and that way, and Highway 40 went right on through. So it was much more
it just
efficient that
bypasses
way.
all. This became Main Street of America. You've heard that term because it went right through.
The politicians were trying to get that highway to go through their town, so they'd get the restaurants and the business and the gas and all that.
There you have it. Thus came an end to official Route 66, but its rebirth comes with nostalgia, with people wanting to come back and driving the highway they drove as kids, coming to California, going back to Chicago, and of course that nostalgia has remained alive. Now, a lot of the towns are gone completely. Baghdad, which is on both sides of the highway, right here where we are standing, is obviously gone. But my understanding, and Sid can fill me in, where's Sid?
Right back here.
Oh yeah. Dave Taylor recalls that there still were buildings here in the 70s, and I think Sid was here in the 70s. You recall? And there was still.
When you're done, I'm have a few comments.
Okay. There's still some folks living at Essex. Obviously, this is abandoned, but the other places, Siberia up here, and what's the name of the Klondike's back down that way, right? Yeah, Klondike's that way. I was thinking of Kleinfelter. Obviously, those are abandoned. Nothing there really but foundations anymore. What's that?
Klondike is up in the youth.
Well, I heard they moved it. And Amboy, as you know, is owned by our late friend Albert Acura and Juan Pollo Restaurants, who's been since 2006 has been very, very kind to let us clamp there many times over the years. We've put in some nice monuments for him, and he's been very, very nice to us. So unfortunately, Albert passed away about 6-8 weeks ago. Some of us went to his funeral, and we'll miss him. But I guess his son, Kyle, right, is going to keep it open and keep going with the business, which is really cool. All right. Now, that's the Route 66 basics right there in a nutshell. Sid, that would be a good time if you want to say Route 66 stuff.
Okay, so you're talking about the Okies. My dad in 31 rode the rails as a hobo in California. And we traveled Route 66 when it was Route 66. Now, I remember the town of Essex, and we were there as clampers long before you guys. And I can tell you some stories when we get there. We're going to Essex, aren't we?
Yeah.
And but I can remember as a kid, we had a water bag. We would shoot for Amboy. That was like where we were sure we could get food and get gas and get services. I remember Baghdad. I remember when it was still here. This is in the 50s. I remember it being open. The 50s. I graduated high school in 56, so I mean I can remember it was a going area. And the thing was that I remember somewhere along here, and I think it was maybe Baghdad, we stopped and we needed water. And I was telling the guys yesterday, this is in the late 40s, early 50s. It was 50 cents a gallon water. It was water, and Amboy water was, if I remember correctly, Paul, and Amboy water was brought in by rail. Okay, so so I remember all these little communities. I also remember when 40 was just about to open, I was going to a meeting in Prescott, Arizona, and I was coming back, and I remember wanting to get across from Essex to Barstow before dark, because it was a 2-lane road. It still hadn't, 40 hadn't opened. And Ludlow, of course, was right on 66, and that's why Ludlow has survived, because 40 goes right through there. So I have a lot of memories of it. When we get down to Chambliss, we stopping at Chambliss, Paul? Excuse me, Wayne.
Stopping at Chambliss?
Stopping at Chambliss?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, we can talk about that then. So I got a lot of memories of it. I remember Roy's being lit up at night. Oh my God, we got the Roy's. Remember the school was there. You know, I remember all that.
Yeah, that's cool.
It was like a modern town in the desert.
You went through it in 64?
64.
How old were you then? Do you remember?
I don't know. I was a little kid.
Little fella.
In a Rambler station wagon.
Now you're really aged or something.
I told by Wayne was closed in 1986. You said
Somewhere right in that
Williams,
time frame.
Arizona.
The last active thing, that last active little section went through Williams, Arizona. I was there on vacation, and then right after that, they shut that down, and 40 connected, bypassed Williams.
Right. Okay, now I'm going to turn things over here to Mark on account of his. One last little.
When my dad earned his PhD at the University of Iowa in August of '62, we moved to San Bernardino. We were told to hang out in Kingman until dark. So my introduction to California in August, middle of August 1962, we get to Needles. We bought this little moving van, like think a small U-Haul truck, and we had to buy 5 gallons of oil because you had to put oil in it real regularly. So we go to Montgomery Wards and we get the 5-gallon bucket of oil and had a little mason jar with the thing on it, put it in. Anyway, so we get to Needles, we have to stop, we need gas for our 54 straight 8 Pontiac in this old van, and it's 106 degrees, it's raining to beat hell. That was my introduction to California.
Welcome to California.
Yes, sir.
In retrospect, it was a monsoon.
So there's these people coming from the east, and they're crossing 66, and it's summer. So it's like 110 or 115. And they see all these cars with the windows rolled up. So they figure, well, that's the way you travel in the desert. And they roll up the windows. And it's hotter than shit. And they pull into Barstow or somebody place, and the guy says, why are you guys sweating? He says, well, we saw everybody in the desert with the windows rolled up. We thought that's what you did. The guy says, you dummy, they all got air conditioning.
I've heard that people would roll up their windows so they'd think they had air conditioning.
All right, Mark. All right, guys, we're here to dedicate this plaque, and to me, it's kind of a serious deal. The way this plaque came about was when we did the Vituscan a little over a year ago in January. I was doing some research, didn't know about this. So, and the first paragraph in one of the research things was the guy was kind of lamenting that there was nothing to memorialize or locate where these 5 guys died. So that's how this whole thing started, and Tim wanted to do a plaque, and he asked me if I had any suggestions. I said this. He ran with it, and then we got Dennis, Eric, and Ray here that did the topper to make this plaque happen.
Nice.
But the little story behind this is, first of all, this is a Beechcraft 18. That's the civilian version. They started building them in Wichita, Kansas in 1937. And it was an airliner, 18-seat airliner. And that's how these auxiliary airfields came about. The auxiliary airfields came about before World War II. They were basically emergency airfields for airliners and stuff that aren't making it across and they can land it. Well, World War II came along. The military took over these auxiliary airfields because even before Pearl Harbor, they started training pretty heavily. Then in the military, the civilian version of this, there's still a handful of these around. The skydivers like these to jump out of. I got 10 jumps out of one that looks just like this. And but the military, they built 5,000, almost 5,500 of them for the military, and they did several things with them. So this was an AT-7. The only thing is it had a little dome, glass dome on top, where the 2 students that are on here, they were doing celestial navigation. They were flying from Sacramento to Tucson. So as they're coming in, you can read on here about what happened, but the Baghdad residents heard of the 2 big radial engines. I think they're a couple thousand horsepower each. They could hear the radial engines coming in at night, and they could see the port and starboard wing lights, and they saw it coming in, and then the next thing they knew, it was cartwheeling across the desert with all these 5 guys in there. But I'm kind of into military history, and what's really important about this is that people don't realize depending on the statistics you look at, between 13,000 and 15,000 military aviators died here in the country in training accidents.
Wow.
That's a lot of people. This was April 9th. This was only, 4 months after Pearl Harbor. The very next day on April 10th, on the other side at Condor Field where we have a plaque, 2 more military aviators. It was a glider training field. They died in a mid-air collision. So they were dying left and right.
One of my boyhood heroes is Chuck Yeager. Got to meet him, got an autographed picture. He was very bitter about the training accidents. With 15,000 military guys dying, he thought the military was using it as a weeding ground for guys they figured weren't going to make it in combat. And he was a very bitter man, and he was a very famous pilot, as you all know, and breaking the sound barrier and all that. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. There are 147 military crash sites just in San Bernardino County alone. There's just north of Ludlow, there's a B-24 crash site. 5 guys bailed out of the B-24. The other 3 augured in north of the mountains. They still haven't found all the wreckage. There's guys that have been hiking around up there for years looking for the wreckage and stuff. And I think that'd be that'd be another great place to dedicate. But what's really cool about this is that the guy that was writing the article on this said it was really sad that the place is not marked. Well, we got it marked now.
Nice.
And there's a place to come here.
Let's say to brethren.
Satisfactory.
Hey, big thanks too to Ray Joy and his guys.
That's why we're
beautiful.
Yeah.
Dennis, Eric. I mean, this came out
Dennis and
bitching.
these guys for putting the plaque
Where's
up.
Dennis? Eric's right here. I saw
Did
Dennis
they make the flamingos too?
Yeah,
Thank you guys, man. This is really awesome. This makes me feel good.
Yeah,
There's a guy
that's
by
cool.
the name of G. Pat Maka who's written extensively.
Lance Corporal Roth, as well as our friend Albert Okura, who was the owner of Amboy, and as I mentioned at the drivers' meeting, passed away a few months ago. And then what was it? Dale Bowman.
Brother's dad.
Yeah, one of our fathers. These are symbolic cemetery sites for them. So if you would remove your hats, gentlemen, if it is your custom. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, and may the perpetual light shine upon them. May they and all the faithful departed through the mercy of God rest in peace. Amen. Amen.
If you have been in the Marine Corps, you still owe your country a military obligation.
All right. Early 1920s, this was still just known as the National Trails Highway. Wasn't Route 66 yet. That wouldn't come until 1926. But still, by then, it had a fair amount of traffic.
Shut up.
Oh, a few of them. Yeah. So a fellow named James Albert came out here, and right here at National Trails Highway and a mining road, he established a store. Now, if you look right over there, you'll see a store.
What's left of it?
What's left of it? Now, I do not know for sure if that is the store that James Albert Chambliss founded, but that is a store that was here for quite a long time. In fact, there's a number of guys here today who were at that store and bought various things while it was still in operation, and I think Sid's going to address some of that too. Wes was just telling me he bought where is Wes? Where'd he go? Yeah, that he bought an ice cream sandwich there, right? Was it vanilla or chocolate? Oh, that's pretty good. Oh, wow. That's a big word. And I do remember coming through here many years ago in the I want to say the mid-1990s, before I was even a brother in the order, and seeing that this was open. I don't know if I stopped and got anything, but it was open up to that. But as you can see, it's in quite a state of disrepair. The roof is caved in and so on. Most of this talk we're going to give over to Sid. And he's got some recollections of the clamp out at which this plaque was dedicated under the reign of our very own Bill West, who's right over there, who's humbug at the time. From here, we're going to head up to the top of that little hill there, that grade called Summit, because it's at the summit. We'll make another stop there, and I'm going to talk about alignments, the different alignments. Because if I don't see this now, I'll forget before we leave. As we head on east on 66, if you look to both your right and your left as you're going up the hill through that little slot, that little pass, you'll see the old alignment of the highway winding its way like this, where the newer alignment goes pretty much straight up and over it. So the highway was realigned in several areas at different points. We'll talk about that more when we get to Summit. I'll hand it over to Sid now.
I have a question. Where do they get the water to farm here?
Ah!
Big aquifer.
There is wells out here.
underneath, do you know about, were you going to address that, or do you want me to?
You can.
Okay. From what I understand, underneath Cadiz over here, when you were driving down, you might have seen that to the southeast, there's a lot of green out there. There's a lot of farming goes out there. Underneath that valley, there's a huge aquifer. The way it's been told to me, now this was from Dave Taylor, so take it with a grain of salt.
Excuse me 1 second. Aquifer is a big pool of water.
Underground.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you.
You used a big word.
Yeah.
Not-
$10.
Yeah, a big pool of water underground. The way Taylor describes it is that it's actually water that's collected way up in the Landfair Valley area and then flows down underground into this valley right here. And it provides a shit ton of water to the farms down here. The headquarters for Cadiz Farms is right over here. And I keep forgetting, is it Cadiz or Cadiz? Cadiz. Like from Hades. Cadiz.
Unless you're in Egypt.
Then it's an entirely different situation.
And they pronounce it Spain.
And so so that aquifer feeds the farming activity down there. By the way, if anybody wants a job with Hades Farms, you can go right up to the main office.
On the aquifer. The issue with the aquifer is it feeds a tremendous number of natural springs out here. And they're worried. There's a very large agricultural operation right down there. And this trailer park, I just found out last night from the guy that owns the Roadrunner, that trailer park is used exclusively by this farming company for all their migrant workers. And there's a horrendous aquifer here, and what they're worried about is if they continue to do large-scale farming, it's going to drop the water table so it can't recharge, and it's going to ruin all the natural springs, which is going to affect all the natural wildlife out here. So it's a big fight. It's been in the courts for a long period of time. And so, Bill, West, do you have anything you want to say?
Nah.
So let's talk about how you guys probably wonder why the plaque is here. I mean, obviously we're commemorating Route 66, but why here? Well, at the time that I was involved with the Graybeards in site selection and plaques, and by the way, Mike Johnson wrote that plaque. He's not with us today. I don't know where he is, but he's done a lot of our plaques, and he did this one. And he was not able, for some reason at that time, to be at the clamp out. So I was contacted by the Route 66 Society, and they said, we understand you guys are doing work on Route 66. And I said, yes. And he said, well, how about if you put up a plaque? We're going to have a road tour going down Route 66. And at that time, the highway was open. 40 is here already, okay? We're talking about, I think that's 2004. When are you humbug?
92.
Dated 92.
Okay, so it's 92. God, Bill, are we that old? So, at that time, the bridges, everything is here, and there's a lot of Route 66 association activity. So the guy says, we'd like, if you're going to put up a plaque, we suggest you put it up here at Chambliss. I don't know where the fuck Chambliss is. I might have been through Chambliss, as you heard earlier with my family. He says, it's at a great intersection of Cadiz Road. Then I knew where it was, and I'll talk about that in a second. And he said the other thing that's going on is there's a great Mexican restaurant right there. And he said, we're going to stop there on the trip, and because we're going to stop there on the trip, it would be great to show them that plaque. So that's why the plaque is here. Now, we came out, and if you go down here about a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, on your left is where we camped. And at that time, I think they had vineyards in there. But their farming operation was nowhere near the scale it is today. So we camped there. A bunch of us ate in this restaurant, which you can see is a really going establishment. I didn't know it was the Chambliss store before it was a restaurant. And I didn't realize the historical significance of Sublime Noble Grand Humbug having an ice cream sandwich there. But it was a going restaurant, and a bunch of us clampers ate lunch there. Now, at this time, okay, to give you some trivia, in the 1980s, early 1980s, I went to a trash track up on what was called the Black Rock Desert. And they were dedicating a plaque, and they had a black powder rifle salute. And one of the guys had left the rammer, I think that's a term, in the rifle.
Bad idea.
And when he fired it, it went out.
Nowhere else to go.
So, the Sublime Noble Grand Humbug, Carl Briggs at that time, called a meeting of the proctors in the trailer, and we went into this trailer, and the motion was made and passed. There would be no more anvil firings, which is significant for the story. Anvil firings or black powder weapons or fireworks. The guy that would be Sublime after me said he came in 1963 into East Anastasio chapter, and he remembers the PBC, somebody shooting black powder pistols at his feet. So it was pretty wild. So they outlawed anvils and all this stuff. In 88, I was the Sublime, and I'm not against anvils. So I tried to get that passed through the proctors, and I did not succeed. So come now to the clamp out. And you guys know, having dealt with me, I am not a troublemaker. I am easy to get along with. I never look around the rules. So I invite down a guy called Dynamite Deke, who fires anvils, and he's got a buddy whose name is Bear, who fires those little black powder cannons. And so we have the clamp out. And Sunday morning, I think it was here, Sunday morning, we announced this clamp out is over. Over. Boom goes the end. Bang goes the black powder rifle. But we didn't violate any rules. The clamp out was over. Bill, do you remember about how many guys we had out here, or Wes, do you remember?
We had close to 200. Yeah, we were getting right close because I was the first one to break 200.
Yeah.
I have one thing to say about that.
Uh-oh.
He said although he was making sure that the clamp out was over, when they fire anvils to seal the powder, they put playing cards around it. And as soon as the anvil went off, Sid goes racing over there, and he's taking these burning shreds of playing cards and taking them off, and then he put them into his cowboy hat in the hat band. And then he got called to the carpet because was the clamp out really over if red shirts were still there, and he went to the meeting where he's getting called out on it with those playing cards.
I didn't do it.
I didn't do it.
I wasn't always an old fart. I've been a fart, but I wasn't always an old one. Thank you, guys.
All right, gentlemen, one last little bit here. As we've been driving down 66, and when you look on the left where this berm is here,
My chopper.
right,
Still have it.
you can see these little outlines of stone. Now, some of them are obviously new, like these. Somebody just put these in here, and those ones there. But some of them are covered with dirt, dirt and other rock. You can make out initials, you can make out names, you can make out phrases. And a lot of times, what would happen is in the old days when families were traveling 66, if the car overheated or had a breakdown, you'd have to pull over to the side of the road. You didn't know how long it was going to take for somebody either to A, come and help you and give you a tow, maybe the amboy, or before Dad could fix the car and you're on your way again, or C, how long it would take before the car would cool down enough that you could move on. So a lot of times the kids would take rocks, of which there are plenty here, put their names and Joey Loves Sally and, you know, Joe Blow 1933. You can see those all along the alignment between Ludlow and here, and even up the road back towards Goss. Sid has one more
So,
thing.
talking about that, when we were here, you know, we like to have the PBCs do constructive stuff, so they did with those rocks, XXXVI along here. Long gone, but we did it. And the other side note is, when I came by as a kid, that Roadrunner Cafe light was lit, and the Roadrunner's legs would be running. And that's what so we're gonna be there in October, and they're hoping to have. Wait, this is the owner of the Roadrunner, and he is a clamper, and he's going to allow us to camp on his property and cause trouble.
Any animals?
He's the biggest troublemaker.
Yeah.
I want to say, I think Mike Johnson was not at this event because his son was down at UCLA getting a liver transplant. So I think that qualifies as a legitimate excuse.
All right,
Pull
fellas,
through.
we're gonna head up the road now to Summit, which is right there at the summit.